This particular document is housed on the TXNSI resource library. When you open the document, you will be taken to the Google Spreadsheet. Please make a copy of the Google Spreadsheet by going to File, Make a Copy. You'll then be able to house the version locally. For each cycle, which is approximately 3 2-week cycles, so for each set of 3 2-week cycles, you'll want to make a new copy of the workbook. The first worksheet in the workbook explains how to use the template. The narrative that's here talks about the template and its importance in capturing the progress on PDSA cycles, and then further details more specifically how to use the spreadsheet. I'm going to walk you through an example now. The second worksheet is the information about the focused menu of improvements. The focused menu of improvements were shared during each of the kickoff convenings in both of the participating districts, and the information is also housed here. Each of the links to practical measures are live and will take you either to the Texas Network for School Improvement resource library, or they might take you specifically to a website. For example, you can see here the equity maps is not a tool on the resource library, but it is on an external website. These are here for your reference. Now let's talk a little bit about using the form. The form is broken down into the section where you focus on planning, doing, studying, and also the act phase of an improvement cycle. So let's begin at the top of the form. There's a place to add the title, just a way to remember what kind of test you're working on. The date, you'll notice I've typed in more than a single week here. This is the first cycle, and we're just calling this the example school. Now, our team has come together and we've decided which of the guiding questions we want to focus on. The guiding questions are in the drop-down menu here. If you choose a different guiding question, you will notice that the driver diagram changes as well. I'm going to go back to the guiding question, how are teachers ensuring that students are engaging in a collaborative mathematics classroom? This is the companion driver diagram, and that is there just as a reminder of our theory for improvement and what we're testing. So as our professional learning community, as our improvement team has met, we have determined that the change idea we would like to focus on, again, let me go back to the focus menu improvements, is this one here, this number 3. We're focusing in on anticipating student strategies and misconceptions in our math tasks. We're going to be working on planning and using purposeful questions so that we might assess and advance students' reasoning and sense making. So in our group form, we've just put the change idea into this section here. And then we continued our conversation and determined that really more refined conversation, the goal for our test is we want to actually monitor math discussions. And we want to do that through the use of purposeful questions that are based on our anticipation of student responses. We're going to use purposeful questions so that we might assess student thinking, but also advance student thinking. And we plan to do that during our class discussions twice per week. Now, we've talked about the importance of predictions. And so our team would continue our conversation and we would write our predictions here. The predictions we have about what teachers will do, our instructional practices, and then how the students will respond to that. And it's important that we have these predictions so that we can come back and compare our data. Next, as our team continues to converse and collaborate, we will describe our plan for our test. And you can see here, I've typed in some text around what's going to happen as we're planning in our PLC, identifying the lessons where we'll have the math discussions. We'll have a conversation as a professional learning community about what we anticipate student responses to be, including their misconceptions. And then we're going to craft a set of questions that we will use in our discussions. These questions will assess student thinking. They'll uncover their misconceptions. They'll also help, we believe, to advance student thinking about whatever our core content objectives are. Then, as part of our test, we know we want to collect data. So we're thinking that we are going to do a kind of a tallying in order to capture the what's happening in the classroom. Our tallies are guided by the NCTM Math Teaching Practices Innovation Configuration Map. Specifically, we're interested in whether or not students are elaborating on their responses or not, whether or not they're using specific math language, and how they might be explaining what they know and understand they're able to do, and how also, because of the questions we use, students are more apt to clarify their thinking. We know that each teacher is going to have at least 2 planned discussions each week for 2 weeks. And we also know that in our plan, we want every teacher to select 3 to 5 focus students. We're doing this in our 8th grade math class, and we're going to be tracking initially for 2 weeks. So the weeks of October 3rd through 7th and the week of October 10th through the 14th. Now we have a conversation as a team about the data that we're going to collect. And so we've determined, again, based on that innovation configuration map, that we're interested in the percentage of our students that are giving little or no elaboration on their thinking. A second data point is the percentage of students that can explain without elaboration. The third data point you see here is related to the use of specific math language to clarify and explain thinking or reasoning. And finally, again, the student responses where percentage who are justifying their reasoning. Now, we'll have created a tool to capture, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. Now, once we have a plan, we know that we're going to actually carry out our test. And once we carry out our test, then we'll study it. While we're carrying out our test, this is where we attend to our practical measure. Let me show you now the practical measure that I've created that will help us collect the data that we expressly decided to pay attention to in our plan. This data tracker serves as the practical measure for the plan and the test in our example. The data tracker, you can see, has the change idea at the top. It has the same goal that we have in our plan. And then specifically, this will allow us over the course of our testing cycle in each of our classrooms to track student responses, simply tallying how each student is responding to the questions posed during the discussion. These columns match the data points from the plan of our PDSA. This data tracker is available to you in the TXNSI library, specifically for the purpose of tracking student responses to assessing and advancing questions. So now that each of us have our practical measure, each week as we are testing our change idea, each teacher on the team has their own worksheet within this workbook. They're duplicates of one another. I'm going to just speak to you from the Teacher A worksheet. If I am Teacher A, we are in cycle 1. I will be adding my data after carrying out the test. The data comes again from the practical measure, and we're adding it for each week of testing. So I typed in this cell, October 3rd. In this cell, I went ahead and added October 8th. Quick just note in this next cell, what did you test? Is I tested and tracked student responses to assessing and advancing questions. And then my data points. So on my tracker, when I did my tallies, after I did my tallies and totaled them up, I calculated the average for each column. It's not about each student, it's about the kind of response from all the students. And then I entered the percentages in each of these cells. And I did that for each week. What's important is at the end of each week, as a teacher, I would like to add just a summary of the information that I will be bringing back to my PLC discussion. What new insights have I had after each of the weeks of testing? Because again, I'm looking at my data and I'm comparing it to the predictions that we made. Another thing to note here is that as I type my data into my individual teacher form, it is going to automatically populate, you scroll down, into the data section at the bottom of the group form. We did this to make it easy for the conversation during the study phase. Again, each teacher adds their data to their respective teacher worksheet, and that data automatically populates back onto the group form. Another thing to note is that this information that is here that shows the kind of data I'm selecting, this was automatically populated from the group form. Again, the scrolling back to the top. So the data, the words that I typed in this cell, that data point 1 was going to be the percent of students that give little or no elaboration on their thinking. I don't have to retype that in my individual teacher form. It is automatically populated into each teacher form. And I did put a little bit of data in here for teacher B as well. So other notes about what is on the teacher form. I will say in this particular cell, the number of change ideas I'm testing, I'm only testing one change idea. And then I want to type a summary of what I learned, and that will be shared with the team. So let me just type some information here. So each teacher will fill out their own form. Then we will come back to the group form. Now, what's wonderful is that when we get to the study phase of the group form, this is to guide our conversation, right? We're using low inference language as we review our data. Again, the data is at the bottom of this group form. There's a place for us to take notes as a team. There's a place for us to use the questions here. What did we learn? What were our predictions and were they correct? Any patterns we notice about students and the data we collect? What patterns might we see and notice about students who seem to not yet be reaching, that we are not reaching as an improvement team? And then we want to think about ourselves. Or do we have any assumptions that we're making that we are bringing to this learning? Again, my note here, right? The studying portion phase is about looking at the relationship between the data and your predictions. It might also be useful for us as a team to plot our data onto a graph so that we can actually see the trends across the 3 2-week cycles, looking at variations, looking at bright spots. So if each one of us as a teacher adds our data to the graph and we use a different color, we can look at individual teacher trends and then overall team trends. Again, we want to be learning with each other. We want to be learning from one another. Once we have completed a 2-week cycle, we're going to make some decisions. Our decisions are not about adopting or abandoning. In the early phases, right, it's about what might we adapt? How might we adjust our plan and then go back and retest, looking at, in most cases, the same kind of data, use the same practical measure. And we want to do that 3 times. The teacher form has a place for cycle 1, for cycle 2, and for cycle 3. Again, each cycle is a 2-week time period. So there's 6 weeks of data that we're able to collect. And you'll notice in the section here at the bottom, just below the act where the data is captured, that data is automatically populating. And so you see the first 2 weeks of data. And then as we add more data, go back to the group form, that information is added here. So the 3rd set of data is in fact what I just added for the 3rd week of the testing cycle. So it's nice to know that that data automatically comes here so that we as a team might see it together So that's the gist of the entire PDSA template. If you looked at it on paper, it's a lot of pages. Hopefully the automation within the Google spreadsheet provides more efficient use for you as a team, not only to record your plan, but also for more, just as importantly, the study phase and the decision or the act phase of your plan.